Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about the Yaesu Vx1r, the Vx2r, and the Vx3r. These are a line of micro HT radios that were designed by Yaesu starting from the late 1990s and ending in the late 2000s. Here on the table we have the three different models that they came out with, the Yaesu Vx1r here, the Vx2r, and the Vx3r. On the side here on the right, we have the Yaesu VX5R for a size comparison, and the Kenwood TH-F6A for also a size comparison. On the left here, we have powering options that work fairly well with the VX1R, and can work with the VX2R and the 3R. This is a solar battery unit, and it uses two AA batteries where you can charge it via solar or via a USB input with an adapter cable. On the table here, we have the Kastar FNP60 battery charger. We have these small batteries here, and we have the other charging option for the VX1R and the powering option for the rest of the radios. So basically, for the VX2R and 3R, you can use these batteries, plug this Kastar charger into a USB battery bank. It might not run with this, as the voltage requirements might not be there, or rather the milliamp current requirements might not be there. But as you can see, it powers on here, and if we load this battery into here, we can see now it's charging via this little meter here. So this one appears to be fully charged. So like so, for example, you can use this system to charge your batteries in the field for the VX lineup. Let's start with the VX1R and look on the outside of it. These are all SMA type of radios with an SMA port here for the antenna. I have them all adapted with the SMA to BNC connector and an aftermarket antenna. We have the rotary encoder knob here. It's a single knob here with a click-based tactile feeling. On the side here, we have the PTT button, and we have the monitor button and the power button here, as well as the DC input port for range of 5 to 6 volts. And on the side, we have nothing here but a little bit of a grip stipulation. And then on the back, we have this clip with the screw and the lanyard adapter and the default lanyard that comes with the radio. On the bottom, we have the battery door here. And inside we have the FNB-52 lithium-ion battery. This is a 700 milliamp hour battery. You can buy these aftermarket for about $20. There is a rare AA adapter case for this, but it is hard to find. So we just use the lithium-ion battery for now. This door is a weak point of the VX1R. If you drop it on the bottom, it tends to open up the door and drop the battery out, or it tends to disconnect the radio from its electronic connections. Minor note on that, but it does happen if you drop it or hit it on the bottom pretty heavily. So let's go into the UI and talk about the radio a little bit. As you can see, it starts up with a voltage indicator, and I have it in memory mode, but you can switch it to memory VFO mode with this button down here. So see, we switched it and we go back to memory mode. It's important to know if you use the encoder knob, it will go back into VFO mode. These are up and down buttons for the memory banks. And we have a band button here to change the VHF to UHF bands and to scroll around the different type of receiving bands that you can use with this radio. We have a function key here, which kind of allows you to access the secondary functions, which are listed on the keys here. It's kind of hard to read because it's fairly worn out. We have a volume key here, so you can push the volume and change the knob and change your volume here. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the speaker here. We'll push band here. I'm going to go through the different bands here, and we have a variety of different frequency set band lists that are programmed in the radio. And we have our broadcast band here. This is an AM type of band, and this little meter here is acting as an indicator of where you are approximately on the scale of an AM radio. So it's like compared to the old AM radios with that little marker that moves around with the dial and a approximation range for the labeling of megahertz. So that's how you would use this. Instead of having a digital readout, you use that little bar down there. So let's go ahead and get to the FM radio here. We'll play a little bit of the radio here. This is a local radio station, which comes in okay. And then we have an aircraft band here, and it goes back to VHF. So this does quite a few different types of bands for its time. It's not a full wideband receiver, but it does have a good capability of receiving broadcast bands, AM, FM, aircraft bands, weather frequency, TV, UHF bands, and upper portions of the UHF spectrum. It transmits at about 50 milliwatts on low power here, and it also transmits at about 500 milliwatts on high power. So it gives you roughly about maybe 10-12 minutes of in-world talk time on high power, and then low power you'll have a little bit longer talk time, depending on the state of your battery and age and other factors. So the interesting thing about this radio is the VHF spectrum you can only scan at once, and you can't scan VHF and UHF at the same time. You have to switch your bands. So that is a negative part of the VX1R. But a positive part of the VX1R is that it can be used in the field with a USB battery bank. And like we described earlier, with this battery bank here, being a AA1, you can take a cable that you can buy off eBay for about $1.75 or so, and you can plug it in, and this goes directly to a DC input. And if you align it just right in the charging port here, most of them align pretty well, but some used ports won't align very well. When I start this up, this should read something different than a 3.7 volt readout on the battery. So it's reading 4.7 volts. And what that means is that this thing is being powered by the battery pack, the USB battery pack here. So you can use this to transmit and receive. It works fairly well. You can even take the AA batteries out of this solar charger and run this at about 3.3 volts, 3.4 volts on receiving only. So this will not only run the radio in both low and high power, it'll also charge the battery pack inside. So you have a different way of keeping this radio in the field via its powering options. In other words, you can run this off a USB indefinitely as long as you get the USB battery bank charged. Now this battery bank will work with the VX2R and 3R but not charge the batteries. You can only run the receiving side of these radios with this battery bank. So that is the VX1R in a nutshell, a fantastic field radio, and it's the one I use most commonly in a lot of my different EDC kits. And I would definitely recommend it to anybody for an EDC radio, as it's a fairly simple, straightforward radio. Moving up to the Yaesu VX2R, we see they have done a different change of layouts here. Still the same SMA antenna port, but the actual default antenna that comes with the VX2R versus the 1R is slightly different in the center pin. So you want to be careful about interchanging the different antennas for the different models. Now on this particular model, we have an aftermarket lanyard, but we can see on the front here, it has changed the different layout of buttons. We have the band button here, high-low button here, the VFL memory button here. The function key is still relatively the same. We have a home reverse function here. We have this special ARTS button / special bank assignment button. And then we have a squelch type button here and CSS SS button here as well. On the side, we have a different PTT and monitor and power function. We have a slightly bigger power button, a independent monitor button as opposed to combined with the PTT rubber button, and a smaller PTT button. On the back, we still maintain the screw for an adapter of a clip potentially, and we have the lanyard port here. And we're going to go ahead and take apart this battery. We'll undo the lock here at the bottom, and we'll simply slide the case off on the back here, which reveals our Fuji NP-60 battery. Now this is important because this type of battery you can find readily available on eBay and on Amazon. It's relatively inexpensive. It's one of those old camera batteries that they used to use in the early 2000s. We have the contact points for positive and negative, and this is the back of the case here. So we can insert that in, and you can take these batteries out and charge them in a USB charger, which I do have an aftermarket one, which we'll get to a little bit later, or at least show you in the B-roll what that charging system looks like. But basically, it's a flexible charging system where you can rotate out the batteries on the radio here, and you can rotate in new fresh ones and maintain operational status in the field, although not seamless fully anyway, but nonetheless you can still use it in the field indefinitely as long as you have a USB battery source. So the other difference here is the encoder knobs. From the first generation to the second, they changed it into a dual knob. Instead of having a volume button on the UI system, they have a dedicated rotary knob here, or a just knob, not necessarily rotary, but we have a rotary secondary knob on the outer side of that, which has tactile feeling. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And the differences with the memory in this particular model is that it holds up to 900 versus just maybe about 50 or 60 in the older model here, regular memory channels we're talking about. And you can have a combination of both the labeled type of memories or non-labeled. So in this case, we push the band button here. We're in memory mode. Right now we're not in VFO mode, and it should rotate around to different banks. Now, if we go into VFO mode, we have, again, the BC band or broadcast band. This is AM. In this case, unlike the Vx1r, we actually have a frequency counter to kind of dial in the approximate frequency for the AM radio, which is a much better upgrade than the Vx1r. Let's go ahead and push band. So now we're in the shortwave portion or the HF portion. And we keep pushing band so we can get to the low band VHF frequencies here, approximately around the CB range, a little bit higher than that. And we have the FM radio here. So that was a little sound test of the radio speaker. Not too bad. Not as loud as the Vx1r, in my opinion, but getting close there. We have more bands here. This is a more wider band receiving type of radio. Here's our 2-meter band section here. High band VHF or VHF TV. More higher band VHF, and then UHF here. Then getting up there in the UHF band, Act 1, Act 2, and then back to the AM, FM broadcasting stations. Now, what's interesting about this particular radio is that it has a special memory bank assigned to special stations, unlike the Vx1r, which doesn't have that. This is a new feature that they included with these radios in the early to mid 2000s of Yaesu. You simply push the function button here and the special bank button here, and now we're in our weather channel here. So this gives you weather channel, all 10 channels here, which is quite fantastic to use. You push band to rotate the different types of frequencies. Now we're in the marine channels here. You can listen to marine frequencies. And then you push band again, and then we have what they consider the radio broadcast bands, like BBC, France. These are all kind of like shortwave AM type of receiving pre-programmed memories, which is nice of them to do. And for the time period, that was pretty valuable. Still can be to today, but they may not align with the actual labeling in the system as of today. So those are your different memories in the VX2R. What's nice about the VX2R is that you can actually program it with Chirp. There's a program that programs the physical memories in there. I did it all by hand, which isn't too bad either. So you can front-end program these two radios pretty relatively easily. Let's try to get out of the special band here, back to the memory. Now, you notice it says memory when I switch it there, and this will give you the general memory portion of all the memories in your programmed radio. I have about 200 or so, and some are labeled, some of them are not labeled, as you can see. So you have a combination of both labeled and unlabeled. However, you can only have either or for that particular frequency. For example, I can't display the name and the frequency in this radio, unfortunately, unlike some newer radios. But if we push band, you can have different band banks. If we push function and band, we can change our different banks of memories too. So you can further organize and sub-organize your memories. So in this case, I have a bank 1. This is for work when I scan around for listening for calls in case I have to go up and do a rescue. I have this set on here, and I can hold down the band button and scan both VHF and UHF frequencies. So that's another change in the VX2R versus the 1R, where you can only scan one band at a time. This will do both bands in the scanning memory function, which is quite nice. Let's go ahead and stop that. And the other thing with this is that it does approximately, I think, 100 milliwatts on low on the battery and about 1 watt out on VHF 2-meter output on the battery, and a little bit less on the UHF band, the 70 centimeter band. So it does improve the amount of power output in the system. So that's another upgrade, in addition to being a little bit more sensitive on the receiving side and having an actual counter for the frequency of the AM broadcast bands and a wider band reception. Those are some of the main takeaways with this radio here. So that's the VX2R in a nutshell. Moving along to the VX3R, they did a little bit more improvements on this. It's a little bit bigger than the other two. It's a little bit more beefier, and they have some innovative ideas which they kind of included with this. Now, on this particular model, we have a lot more buttons on the front here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different buttons on the front compared to the 7 here and the 7 here. So it's 2 more buttons, a lot more different things going on here on the front end. And then on the side here, compared to all 3, we can see the evolution of the changing PTT button here. It's a little bit bigger, much flatter, so it's not prone to getting worn out. The monitor button is still separate, and we have the power button, which is relatively the same, but a little bit more flatter. And on the side, so we have more texture grip. On the top portion, it's changed again the rotary encoder knobs. We have the microphone ear ports on all 3 in the same location. However, on the third one, we have a knob that pops out, which you can change and move, and then pops back down to stop it from moving. This was addressed from the second version, where these would get knocked and moved around and would change frequencies on the person. So they decided to change that idea here, which is a successful idea in my opinion. It's a great engineering feat. Again, we still have SMA connections here. In this particular model, we have a Comet, or a MC32 micro antenna. Not the greatest reception antenna or transmitting antenna, but good enough for practical and small work. On this side, we also have another change. We have the input for the charger, DC charger, and we also have a earphone port for the stereo decoding wide FM receiver inside of here. So unlike the previous generation models, this now does stereo and decoding from the FM portion of the receiver, which is quite a pleasant listening experience if you're going to take this as a travel radio, which is what these are really designed for. These micro HTs is a small pocketable ham radio that you can use and listen, and they're primarily marketed as a listening device. On the back here, they did away with the adapter port for a clip or the screw port. It's no longer there, but we still have the lanyard hold, and it's still the same kind of backing where you would take apart the back here and replace it with a different type of battery. Again, we have the NP60 battery format in here and same exact back section. So that's relatively the same compared to the VX2R. So it's nice that they continued using the same battery format between the 2 variants there. Now let's go ahead and turn this on. And much like the memories of the VX2R, this one has the same amount of capable memories in it, has the same special memory bank in here, has a separate radio button to get to just the radio portion you want to listen to. We have the band button here, and again, it does alphanumeric labeling. So on these frequencies, you can either have the frequency or the label here. So you can choose which one. Again, it unfortunately doesn't do both the label and the memory at the same time, the name rather, but it works fairly well for what it does in labeling. We have the mode buttons, which you can change modes. We have a radio button. If I push the radio, push band, you can change your different type of band on the radio. Basically the 2 broadcast bands, AM and FM. As you heard there, you can actually hear the AM portion of the radio. You push the bottom button here. Lower that a little bit while we talk about it. So we can see that it has a volume button like the first model, so that came back for the second one, and that's because this can only do one type of encoding. It's not a dual encoder like the VX2R. But what this has that the other 2 don't have is a internal AM ferrite bar, meaning this has a good reception by itself without having to attach a big external antenna to receive AM broadcast stations. So that is a highly useful item in the VX3R, and it's what separates it from the other 2, in my opinion, in addition to having the earpiece here that decodes stereo wide FM. Now I'm going to try to get that other station with this antenna on it, the WHUD. And there's a symbol that comes on the bottom of it when it indicates it's receiving an FM or has enough information to decode the FM signal, unlike the other two radios. So it does have a separate type of a decoder on the radio to decode that. So it's important to note when you're near a FM radio station and you have good enough signal, you'll be able to hear it in stereo. To get out of that, if we want to get to our weather, we push function and we go to the special bank section here, and now we have a weather channel. And much like the VX2R, you can scroll around the 10 frequencies and try to listen for weather. You can also push band to change it to the VHF Marine. Push band again, you get that, again, the pre-programmed shortwave radio stations that are programmed into the radio here. And then back to the weather channel. So it's fairly similar to the VX2R in that extent. Let's go back to our regular band here and our memory banks. Now, when you go to scan, what's interesting about this is that it'll scan your band memories, right? And then it'll jump over to the weather briefly and then back to your band. If you happen to stop it on the weather frequency, it'll be caught in the special bank here and you have to get back out of it to get back to your regular scanning. So that's interesting to note about this radio. I'm sure there's an option inside of it to probably change that, but that's what I get with this radio when I do the scanning here. To stop scanning, simply push the PTT and you're done. Now, some of the issues with the VX3R here is that when you go to charge the battery in the DC port, if your main battery is very low, and this happened to me, and it's a known issue, there's a potential for the board to be short-circuited because of the surge of energy, is what they claim. Basically, you can blow out your radio, and you have to send it and get serviced. This happened to me when I went to charge my battery when it was pretty low. I plugged in the wall wart adapter that comes with this to charge it, and it stopped the radio from working. So, unfortunately, the only real safe way to charge this radio is not through the DC port, but through, again, the USB charger for the NP60 battery format, which you can find for a relatively cheap price, but it does bulk up the carrying items with the radio. Instead of just carrying a small cable, now you have to carry a separate dedicated charger for the batteries. Plus side is you can charge one battery, swap in another, and keep operating and using the radio. You can run this radio off of this power supply, but you can't really transmit with it. You can just listen. So these two are only for receiving with this setup here. The VX1R, however, you can receive and transmit with this setup, making this a pretty versatile field radio, although it's not as flexible in its offered options of receiving and transmitting and memory storage like the VX2R and VX3R. Overall, the VX3R also has another function which allows you to use this little LED in the front as a light. Whether that's very useful or not is debatable, but it is an option you can use with this third model in the memory mode. So that's important to note as well. This has a lot of advanced features on it, the 3R. If you can find a 3R, I recommend, even with the powering issue on the side, you can bypass that and you can get a pretty good small compact ham radio receiver that receives in stereo that fits in a pocket format. If you're looking for something that's a little bit less pricey, perhaps, and a little bit more lower tech, if you will, the VX1R is a decent radio as long as you can find the replaceable batteries, the lithium ion. They still make them nowadays on eBay for about $20. You can replace the battery pack in here. It's more expensive than these batteries, but however, once you get that battery, you're pretty much set for a couple years of use, and you can also charge it in the field and run it off USB in the field, provided you don't break the DC port there. But overall, those are the VX1R, 2R, and 3R in a nutshell. I didn't go into too much depth with them because that'd be a very long video. It's already a long video now. But these are some of my favorite micro HT radios. I must have probably about maybe 6 or 7 of these in different various kits. I make them with my EDC bags if you haven't seen them on the channel. recommend you check them out and the different builds that I use. But compared to other modern radios or modern sized radios or small radios, we can see the Vx1r, which is antiquated by this day and age, but it's an indication of the size changing. These are 5-watt capable radios. These are sub 5-watt capable radios. And let me bring out another comparison here, just for size reference. It's a little bulky here, so I'll try to keep it on the table without messing up the whole lineup. So this is my Motorola MTS 2000. It's an older VHF monoband radio, but you can see, compared to work radios and other standard size ham radios or work radios, VHF radios if you will, these are very tiny and small, which is the whole point of their lineup, is to be small and somewhat discreet and portable and accessible for when you need them. I'm not always going to be carrying around this huge radio or even these radios in my pocket. These you can actually pocket and carry. If you look at the antenna options, they do even sell soft rubberized antennas, unlike this hard antenna. So it makes it a much more flexible option to carry on your persons. If you're trying to go for a less tactical look or a very discreet look, these are perfectly fine and functional EDC radios. This is what I would call EDC radios. This is not an EDC radio by any means. These you can probably get away with, but you can kind of see the step up in sizing for radio technology, and that's why I bring this out on the table to show you the various sizing. These don't have DTMF keypads, unfortunately, but you can program DTMF codes in each radio. That's another thing I didn't mention. So that's important to note. If you're looking to access a repeater with DTMF codes, you can pre-program these radios to do that. These make it a little bit easier having an actual keypad to do that, so you can just punch in the tone and you're done. But there's trade-offs with the sizing and downsizing of radios. So you can't have a full high power 5-watt output. You can't have all the memories you want. You can't have a full DTMF keypad, but you can still have the capability of talking and listening to a usable degree. And that's where I would say the strengths lie in these little micro HTs. I've talked quite a lot, and I think that's all I have to say about the Vx1r, 2r, and 3r. Let me know which models you guys have, or which models you're thinking about getting, or what you like about which models, and I'll try to get back to you. I want to thank you for watching, and enjoy your day.